Answering a YouTube question today. The question is upgrading your trigger necessary to excel in the sport? I keep mine mostly stock because it's also my everyday carry, and I need it reliable with all ammo. Thanks in advance. Well, yes and no. It depends largely on what the gun is, and I've got a few different guns to talk through. First one, fun little blast from the past. This is a Tanfolio Stock 2. I shot this heavily. I had 4 of these when Production Division was really popular and everyone was shooting iron sights. This gun, yeah, I mean, to be competitive, it wasn't a competitive gun out of the box for a couple reasons. Recoil spring was too heavy, but talking specifically about the trigger was around 12 pounds, double action, and 6 pounds probably-ish for single action. Super heavy, kind of gritty. It would stage a bit with just a little bit of polishing and some springs. Now, maybe 6 pounds. I never got the crazy stuff, but 6 pounds or so with the double action and single action is probably 3. Yeah. So nothing super crazy or light, but that made the gun way more shootable. It's a heavy metal gun. I like these a lot. I still like this one. This was the gun I used for matches. This was my favorite of the Tanfos I've owned. So yes, for competition, this gun needed some training or needed some tuning. However, I always kept the hammer spring heavy enough that I could fire any primers. Back in the day when you could get primers, people would have Federal only tuned guns because Federal primers are a little bit softer. So they'd get the gun as light as they can that would still set off primers from Federal and then seat them down really, really deep in the brass when they're reloading it. So definitely a competition thing, not as much for a carry gun or maybe a gun that you'd want to, I don't know, do teaching with. It just depends, again on what the audience is, though. Skipping forward, this is a Glock 47. This one is pretty basic. All it's got is just a 4.5-pound striker spring. Other than that, it's factory. This just happens to be one of Benny Boy's guns. But the trigger on this one is factory. So it's still honestly pretty friendly to shoot. The gun doesn't need a ton of changes to be able to be shot well. However, if you're going to shoot USPSA or practical shooting, then yeah, putting a lighter trigger, changing the recoil spring, and all that stuff probably makes sense to compete at the highest level. But for most people, this gun's pretty good to go out of the box and will teach you a lot. Changing the trigger shoe is something I've done in some of them. I like the Apex shoe because it's a flat trigger face. But for that, even if I kept the rest of the internals the same, it was just because I liked the wider flat face. I feel like it was easier to press the trigger straight back. The Glock trigger shoes, the factory ones, are a little bit more pointed or triangular, and so it feels like there's just less, I don't know, it's just the way my finger contacts the trigger. I feel like this is a little bit tougher to press the trigger straight back. So the Apex is just a little bit of help, but otherwise, this gun just has grip tape and a 4.5-pound Wolf striker spring. This gun would work well for USPSA because the striker spring's still fine with carry ammo. So it'd be fine for practical shooting, fine for carry. You could do a bunch of different stuff with it. Although some people might not want to carry it with the grip tape just because it'd chew up your clothing and stomach a little bit. But it all depends on what you want to do. So this would be a good do-all gun, but for just USPSA, probably look at changing the trigger. Probably experiment with different recoil springs to see if you find one that likes the impulse a little bit better. But it's kind of a minor thing, and it all depends on what you want to do. One more gun to look at. This one is a Walther PDP. This gun is honestly 100% good to go out of the box. This is the factory Walther trigger, and this one has just a little bit more travel than the dynamic performance trigger, but still it's light. There's not much like over travel or anything like that. It's right to the wall. It's super light. So with this one, the only reason I would change the trigger is just because I liked the shape of the dynamic performance trigger better. It's the trigger shoe itself is set back a little bit and it's thinner on the sides. This trigger being wide, just the way it's, if I can get a good angle, it was really easy for me when I got my finger inside the trigger guard. I would want to start pressing on the trigger to the side before I got around to contact the little trigger safety. And that was just due to how far the trigger's forward, how wide it is. So just for my tastes, I prefer the dynamic performance trigger, but it's not even a weight thing. It's just the way it feels in my hands and the way I touch, like interface with the trigger. But I can still shoot this one plenty fine. I'm just more careful to make sure my finger's in front of the trigger completely before I start to apply pressure. So, to answer the question, is upgrading the trigger necessary to excel in the sport? Yes and no. If you want to make GM, yeah, it's going to help you having a gun that's modified or tuned. But I know a lot of people that have had very good results with essentially stock pistols. So therein lies, it depends on what you want to get out of it. If it's a gun you want to carry also, not having anything crazy done to it makes sense. But if it's a gun you're shooting for practical shooting, I get to the point where I shoot those guns enough, or I'll have normally two, a training gun and a match gun, and I'll shoot them enough that probably you wouldn't want to carry it anyway, just because of how many rounds are through them and the possibility for parts breakage and that kind of thing anyway. So in the end, I don't have a great answer for you. It really just depends what you want to accomplish. For this person asking the question, keeping the trigger mostly stock, so it's an everyday carry, that makes the most sense. Then you just shoot practical shooting with the gun you already carry. So you're gaining experience with that, getting better with the gun you carry, and you don't have to spend money on a new pistol because something you already have. Otherwise, if you're looking for a gun specifically for competition, then guns like the CZ Shadow 2 make a lot of sense. And with that, you're going to want to do some trigger tuning, or maybe the short reach reduction kit for the trigger, which on those Shadow 2s especially, the trigger is really far forward, and it doesn't feel like it's as easy to get my finger on the trigger when the hammer's down. So having one of those that sets the trigger back a little bit would make sense. Some polishing or springs to make the trigger lighter, because yeah, if it's a competition gun, you want to get every edge you can get. So again, it just depends on what it is and what you want to accomplish with it, in my opinion.